Thank you everyone for joining here. My name is Ashok Sivanand. I am the CEO of Integral. I care deeply about helping bring better products to the world by minimizing the waste of time, energy, and human creativity that tends to occur in the software development process. Before I started Integral, I've had the chance to develop plant floor applications for General Motors and Suzuki. I wore a number of hats, both technical and product, at an early stage IoT company called ShopLogix. And then I worked at Pivotal Labs as a product manager and then on the leadership team. Today, I'm going to talk about building the best teams that build the best products. And we're going to get there by walking you through how we can enable your teams to add value faster, to build better products, and to really have fun and have a team that wants to stick together longer. So, two pizza teams. This is a term that was coined at Amazon, rumored by Jeff Bezos. And the cliff notes say that the team size should be no larger that can be fed adequately by two large pizzas. Much like a lot of quotes you've heard, the person you heard it from may not have told you the rest of it. Where the composition of the team, and I'm struggling here not to make some kind of analogy about pizza size and pizza toppings for composition, but either way, the composition of the team is a major consideration that I find to be overlooked. So today we're going to talk about how two pizza teams aren't just about size. They're about enabling teams that are autonomous, measured by a well-defined set of metrics, and are responsible for all aspects of the business outcomes that led to why the team was created in the first place. To help us get there, I am going to talk you through three stories of products that I got to work on. The first one was when I worked on a plant floor building applications at a plant that was a collaboration between General Motors and Suzuki. I was a software engineer. I worked on site and built products for folks who worked at the plant. These could be operators, supervisors, managers. I got requirements from usually managers or consultants who explained the problem to me in their own words. Now, instead of typing up a 40-page requirements document, it was often easier for us both to just go do a walk on the line and show me where the problem is, what they're trying to solve. And I'd get to go down again to the line. I'd study the problem more. I'd talk to the operators and ask them how they solved it today. And then I'd go about to writing code. Now, this was back in the day when we didn't have any fancy staging environments. We pretty much made sure things worked on our dev machines and then pushed to prod, hope for the best. I actually famously once stopped the line for 8 minutes while we were running a ton of overtime. It cost the company somewhere between 4 and 6 times my annual salary because I fat fingered something. Anyway, that one kerfuffle aside, I'd get to work alongside the folks who approve the budget. I get to talk to them about how they want to get a return on that investment. I'd sometimes clarify their expectations from the software. Sometimes they weren't expecting enough from it. Sometimes they were expecting too much. And once we got to an agreement, I'd get to work. Now, I'm a pretty social person. So often I like to go chat with the folks more than I like to write code. So every once in a while, I take my laptop down to the line. I'd go chat with the operator when they were in between work and kind of show them on my laptop, like, hey, this is what I've built so far. How about that, huh? What do you think? Now, I could tell you that I went there to seek feedback, but really I think I was seeking validation, not necessarily even for the products, but for how smart I was, because I was building like magic. And I got a lot of dopamine hits from that. And inevitably, the operators would ask some clarifying questions. They would provide feedback, and I would incorporate that feedback, eventually roll it out, train them on how to use it, and go on to the next one. I'll say I built some of my best applications there, and it was my first job or my first real job. And I assumed that's how software was just always built. The second story happened when I worked at the IoT company. So we had a really smart and effective way to get data off of plant floor machines and then displayed back to operators on marquee displays. So that's the thing on the left. You might see it in an airport or in public transit. We use those to share information back to the operators so they knew whether they were on track or off track. And we'd also share reports to the management team via web dashboards that they could hit up on their computers. Now, circa 2012, TVs were becoming a lot cheaper than the marquees. So it opened up the opportunity for a lot more flexibility with putting some of those web reports onto the TVs and showing that back to the operators on the shop floor, instead of these small displays that had very limited flexibility. I was put in charge of deploying and developing the solution for our pilot customer. I was assigned a developer who would build whatever reports we wanted based on the data we had available. In retrospect, I'm pretty embarrassed that instead of thinking about this new paradigm of a TV over a marquee and reimagining, rethinking, of course, I just took everything that was on the marquee and tried to shove it onto the TV. Maybe we can rationalize it as a user adoption curve so we didn't confuse the user too much, but that wouldn't be the most authentic. And anyway, thankfully, it got better over time. And we're not quite there in this story yet. So back to customer number 0, the developer and I, we tried out a few things on how we display this and tested it in the office. I drove out to customer 0 to test it on the actual display. They had the TV installed. I went there ready to do a grand reveal of my baby. I was so proud of us. The new fancy screens that we worked on, I was excited about how much in awe all the operators would be about this shiny new report that we had for them compared to the age-old display. I was ready to walk in and be the hero. Y'all know how I like those dopamine hits when I do a product reveal, right? Of course, I had to configure a few things like font size and stuff on site, just to final tweaks. So I thought we were ready. I wasn't sure, so I went over an operator and I asked her whether she could read the font properly. And she said, to my surprise, that, yeah, I can read the numbers just fine, but these numbers are just as useless to me as the one in the old display. Okay, that's impossible. Of course, I put on like my shield, my armor, and I went to battle because there was no way that the metrics we showed her were useless. At the end of the day, I was the one who installed and configured this 6 months ago. And so since she did work for the customer, instead of just getting defensive and proving to her how she's wrong, I did the needful of what my boss may have preferred. So I asked her, why, miss? Why would you say that these metrics are useless? Frankly, bless her. Despite my immature defensiveness, she was really kind to take the time. She explained to me how her machine worked. She explained to me what she had control over and how the metrics we were showing her didn't really provide any insights to her on something she could control in real time. And she went as far as saying, if you could show me these metrics, that might give me a little bit more visibility. I was really blown away. It was real humble pie. And I called up the developer who was in the office right away. We made some quick changes and mocked some stuff up back and forth. He sent over a packet that I could push into the update in real time, just right there while I was standing on a plant floor, like there were no adults, just an operator, myself, and the developer. You think I'd have learned from the last story about the rigorous testing before pushing to prod, but here we are. Now, she didn't really thank me per se, and I didn't get the celebration that I was anticipating as I drove in, but she did give me a heads up. One of these looks of acknowledgement that felt pretty good. We ended up going back afterwards and revisited the metrics on each of the lines. conducted more interviews with the operators and analyses, and put up the most actionable metrics or insights on the new screens. This was quite successful for that startup. The client ended up wanting to roll us out to 200 plants globally. So worked out pretty well for all of us. Story number 3. I was working on a really audacious consumer app many years ago. Massive undertaking, 300 to 400 people on the program. Some of the folks that I got to work with there were truly the smartest, most talented that I've ever gotten to experience. The problem space was new, exciting, and the goals of the product were really audacious and was really awe-inspiring. There were a ton of design teams, mobile teams, web teams, API teams, data teams, DevOps teams, which DevOps teams being separate from the developer team, the irony was not lost. It was definitely, nevertheless, very exciting to be part of such a bold endeavor. That being said, it quickly got frustrating when the teams couldn't really draw the connection between what we were doing, the problems we were solving, the creativity we were applying, and how this app was going to be successful or how it was going to change someone's life. And then some of the other windows into what happened, executives got impressions and expectations created by the UI or design team. They did really well to be creative, to think about really compelling and engaging UI features. Unfortunately, they didn't really talk to the engineering teams on the feasibility of this UI. And that put us in an impasse where the executives really had expectations of these shiny UI, and the engineers had to go about figuring out how to build this infeasible UI. We spent a lot of time minimizing the frustrations of the executives in case we couldn't do it and the posturing associated, all the while trying to deliver the app behind the UI, the shiny UI that had the features against the milestones of the program. I don't really blame the design team here in retrospect. Don't get me wrong, I did at the time. I realize now that they were just trying to show off their skills in the domain that they were most familiar with. It's a natural bias for all of us. The mobile team did the same thing with the APIs, the data teams, and so on. And unfortunately, I think we were trying to flex in our own domain rather than focus on what the customer or the end user would benefit from if we were to combine our skills. I ended up getting pretty frustrated, demotivated. Instead of being the problem solver that I was in stories 1 and 2, I was here as a helpless order taker, not being able to connect the dots. I was seeing some of my teammates leave to go join other projects, wondered if I should do the same. I think we were mostly frustrated because we didn't really know whether our hard work and creativity were amounting to something or not. We often saw risks in the system, but we didn't really have the accountability or authority to surface them if they were risks that another team owned. So we didn't get to surface them, let alone drive any mitigations as a team. Tracking the progress was done pretty subjectively, and different teams marched on long integration times. It'd sometimes be months before we could integrate our ends of the system to other parts, whether they're API to API, API to UI, API to data. And as you can imagine, 6-7 months in, when we finally did our first integrations and integration testing, it was just a bloodbath. The number of surprises that popped up were overwhelming. It was hard to see the forest for the trees and know where to get started on solving and fixing them. The first time the end consumer ever saw the UI or flow was after the product was actually launched. When we launched, we looked at the analytics and data and we realized that we weren't quite on the mark in terms of what we thought we were looking to do. There was a whole other set of folks who were looking at the data and trying to find any metric that was looking up to the right and spin it as progress. The truth around metrics is that ROI is extremely accurate. The challenge of it is that it just takes a long time to realize. So if you're used to working in a hardware company and it takes 3 to 5, 7 years to see the ROI of something that you know how to build time in and time out, waiting 3 years for a software project that has a lot more uncertainty, maybe targeting a customer you don't usually target, maybe it's going after a solution set that you don't have a ton of muscle memory around, 3 years can be a really long time to know whether you're on the right track or not in a highly accurate way. So all in all, I ended up wondering a lot about how may we have figured out some of these things sooner? How could we have minimized the waste of time, effort, and human creativity to build this product better? I asked around, it was sad to hear that this is pretty typical, especially in bigger companies. And folks end up having really slow progress despite having really brilliant people on the teams. This is kind of surprising because a lot of these companies are launching thousands of amazing products over decades. And how could it be that building software was so hard, right? So upon some reflection, I looked at the difference between those 3 projects. So the first one on the left was where I built the plant floor applications. Now in that case, I was the designer, I was the product manager, I was a project manager, I was the developer, I was a QA, I was the data engineer, I was a deployment engineer. I had access to the business owner and they could walk me down to the line and show me where the problem was and why they're paying for it. I had access to the user. I could hear about what their needs are. In story number 2, where we built the marquees, or we switched from the marquees to the TVs, I was the designer, I was the product manager, I had a full-time developer assigned to myself. And this developer and I would work together quite intently. We went out to lunch together, we worked late together, we even sometimes hung out on double dates with our girlfriends on the weekend. He'd call me up all the time with ideas, I'd call him up, we'd always answer our phone calls. So there was a lot of trust between us. And similarly to the first one, we had access to the customer. In part was internally our head of product, and externally the customer that was on site. We also had access to the user, the operator, who was really kind and walked me through how her line worked. We could deploy our own code. In story number 3, they're not all smiley cat faces. I was the product manager, but of only one layer of the application. This was a horizontal layer, so there wasn't a value that we had that the customer could define. It was operational in nature in terms of how my role is defined as a product manager. I had access to the customer once in a while. I did not have any access to the end users, and once in a while got to talk to the designers. I certainly never got to have lunch with them or know what their partners or spouses' names were or anything like that. The engineers on my team could deploy our own code, but there was a lot of integration steps that included waiting for months before we could stitch together with other components of the system. On top of that, I think this is one of those cases where this business owner, as smart as they were, did not have a ton of experience with building apps for consumers. It's a lot harder building consumer applications compared to building a shop floor application when I could walk down the hall and ask them about their needs. I could go and train them myself on using it to make sure that they use it the way it was intended. Consumer applications, all bets are off, right? It's a whole different level of uncertainty. And I think there's a different stance that we need to take. And 3 things come to mind about the stance that we need to take. The first one is around how we reframe the teams and how the teams have accountability, the authority, and the ability to do everything from defining requirements, designing the product, developing it, testing it, deploying it, and then iterating on the product. The second one is providing access to the customer, the business owner, the person who wrote the business case. Provide access to that person to the team. Figure out together what kind of success factors and metrics before the project kicks off, rather than rationalizing what the best metrics are after the launch. And the third thing is that the team has access to the end user. Who are we building this for? And give them the freedom to learn, to test, experiment, and different approaches to solve for what's desirable and usable for that end user within what would dovetail or segue into the business plan for that customer. Now, there's 5 or 6 things that I think we can do and consider that I'm going to talk about a little bit more in detail around how we can try and achieve these 3 reframes. They are talking about team size, what the name of the team is, what the success factors for the team are, what the composition of the team is, how the team plays, and how we do it before and after a check to see if we're on the right track with this. The first one with team size, I think we've already covered this. If you've heard of two pizza teams, you've already talked about it. I would say two pizza teams are maybe somewhere between 8 and 10 people. And if you look at the number of handshakes that are needed on the team, as in this image, 3 team members have 3 links, 6 team members have 15 links, a 12-person team has 66 links, and over 50 members means you have over 1,200 links. Those are 1,200 people that need to coordinate with each other. And those handshakes are a form of waste, right? So let's keep the team size small, or have a fleet of small teams versus having one big vertical team. Secondly, we'll talk about the team name. So try and identify a team name that's somewhat aligned with the mission for the team, or what value this team is bringing. One way that I like to do this is to identify 3 things: who's it for, what's it for, and what's it do. And the what's it do is usually a good place to get started on your team name. In other words, who's going to use this product? What problem does it solve for that user of the product? And what's the solution that you're solving, that you're using to solve that user's problem? So some common pitfalls are, if your team has the name layer in it, that usually kind of suggests something that's horizontal, where maybe you're a critical part of infrastructure, but it's really hard for you to know who you're serving as any one customer or any one set of problems. So coming up with a North Star or metrics just becomes really hard. Number 3, team success criteria. So based on the problem you're solving, try and determine what success looks like. What may less of that problem look like? Ideally, you'll have a North Star for your product, a North Star metric. That can be hard. So any more than one, the compromise is that you run into having competing priorities. So I'd say maybe start with 3 or fewer, with the goal of whittling it down to 1. Ideally, in an ideal world, moving the needle on this metric will have a measurable impact on reducing the problem. Usually the problem or the solution comes in 3 ways that you can look for. One of them is in revenue generated or growth. The other one is in cost saved or operational excellence. And the third one is risk reduced or risk mitigated when you do a risk analysis. I tend to find a lot of software projects fall into one of these 3 buckets. So starting by identifying if it's one of those 3 and then looking at metrics there. There's a company named Amplitude that has really great workbook if you're looking to sit with your team and do a North Star metric facilitation. So I'd say check that out as well. And we'll move on to the next point here, which is team composition. So we'll go back to the slide we looked at of the 3 stories. So try as much as you can to get everyone you need dedicated to this team. That sounds ridiculous, because these are folks that maybe are part of a shared services group today and you're trying to get them to move. So try and get folks from design, product, engineering, data, QA if you have it, deployment, and get them all dedicated to your projects, maybe at least for the first month or 2. And then we can go back to shared services. And in that first month or 2, we can really spend some time getting to know each other, getting to know the goal, the mission, the value that we're bringing. And then when we go back and we're not maybe dedicated, we know how to prioritize here. This is a really, really critical piece, because when the teams are dedicated, you're going to be able to swivel a chair and make decisions a lot faster versus waiting for the next monthly checkpoint with design or weekly touch point with design. And you inevitably just end up wasting a whole week just waiting for a design team to approve something, because you realize now that you looked at the API documentation that the design that was originally proposed is not something that is feasible, right? It happens all the time. When there's a designer on the team, they can swivel the chair and the designer's like, yeah, you know what? The reason we had it designed that way is to solve this problem. Now that we look at the API, let's change it this way. Can you do that? Yeah, okay, cool. And that goes from a week-long wait to an hour discussion at the most, oftentimes way shorter. Now, back in the day, this was a lot harder because we all worked in different buildings. The design team was maybe part of marketing. The engineering team was part of IT. The DevOps team or the deployment team is part of infrastructure. We sat in different buildings and we were kind of creatures of habit where, I like the snacks here, I like the cafeteria there, and so on. Now that we're working remote, it's a great time to try this out and try and convince some folks at your company to get dedicated folks onto your team so that this team can be responsible for everything from ideating and defining all the way through deploying, launching, and iterating on the product. Next step, go play, go have fun. Go understand why your team exists together. Go learn about your customer, go learn about the user you're serving, talk to them directly, understand their problem. Ideally, like I said, do it as a team. Resist the temptation to start the solution before you really start to see trends in the problem as you start talking to the customers and the users. And then also understanding the implications of these problems. It's natural for us to want to solution and jump to solutions quickly. The best solutions that I'm most proud of have been ones where I was able to find the discipline, or someone on my team helped me find the discipline to just fall in love with the problem a little bit more before jumping to that solution. And be warned, it's going to be similar to when I was with that operator where you think you have it right, but you find out you're wrong. And that can really put us in a defensive state. What helps me is going into the conversation, not as an expert who knows everything, but as a scientist who wants to find the truth. So that's something to consider in terms of a mindset. And then lastly, try and do a before and after survey of everyone that is involved, whether it's the business owners, the users, the teammates managers, to see which they prefer, which model. Is it better when we were all separate? Is it better when we're all dedicated and together? I'd love to know if you do even like a simple like thumbs up, thumbs down, or hey, 1 to 5, how do you feel about how this team's functioning? And then 2 months into this experiment, and 1 to 5 again, what's my new vote? And love to see where that trend lies. So I'll just recap the 5 steps here for everyone, or the 6 steps rather. Think about team size, think about your team name, think about what success means for you. Think about what your team's composed of. Don't forget to play, be scientists, not experts. Now, always do the before and after checks. So here's my hunch on how those before and after checks are gonna go. I think the smaller autonomous teams will add value a lot faster. And this is not just by making quicker decisions or moving faster, but it's also identifying quicker ways in which to help the customer. So going after the denominator is a much faster way to seem twice as fast of adding value than trying to run twice as fast with the numerator. The second thing I think is my hunch tells me that these teams will build better products that better serve the goals of both the business owners and the needs of the users. They're just able to bring a cross-functional, less biased, more diverse set of opportunities, identifying risks, working together for solutions. I also think that ultimately this team is going to have a lot more fun, and retention is a huge priority for us today in the software world. And this is something that I truly think we can do to help our teammates with having fun while we work, and doing our best work and wanting to stick around longer with the problems we're currently solving. So before we get into the Q&A, a couple of things that I wanted to mention. Number one, if you're curious about gelling as a team, now that I got designers and business people and product folks and engineers all on the same team, how do we speak the same language? We are very close to publishing an ebook about 9 critical conversations to have as a team to really improve that team dynamic and end up speaking the same language, get to know each other better, build more trust, get more aligned with what the mission is and how we're going to solve it. So since it's not published yet, send me an email at hello@integral.io and just ask for the email or ask for the ebook rather in the subject. and we will send it to you as soon as it is ready to go. Number two, if you're curious about how to bring this, what we talked about specifically to your team, and you want some focused attention, we do a pro bono, no cost clinic. We do it remotely now, called our office hours. And you can hit it up on our website, and we will schedule an hour or so, and we'll hear you out. We'll nerd out together, and we will see if we can provide some valuable recommendations on how you might be able to bring some of the dynamics we talked about here. And since we're a little bit ahead on time, I can't help myself around the pizza analogy topping. And since we have time, I'm going to have everyone humor me here. We talked about that team going out, understanding the user, finding a thin slice of value that we can add. Here's an exercise we can go through really quickly. All right, so let's imagine that we're a pizza company. You are in charge of building an app so that we can be hip to the kids, and we've got an app too. We have 3 months to build 3 of these features. The first feature is the size of the pizza. You can choose whether small, medium, or large. The second feature on the app is choosing the toppings on the pizza, pineapples or no pineapples. And the third is ordering the pizza, right? Now let's assume that these features, for the sake of argument, take the same amount of time. They take a month each. And our 2 pizza team, because we want to deliver value early, wants to put something valuable in front of the users by the end of the first month. So we have to choose between one of these 3 features to put out there. Which one would you choose or advocate for on your 2 pizza team about the feature that we want to put in front of the user first? Do we want to put number 1, size of the pizza, number 2, toppings of the pizza, or number 3, order the pizza in there? And feel free to just pop your answers in the chat. We got a number 3, some number 3s. We got a 2. Someone on team 2, a lot more for team 3. Team 3 is running away with this. We've got, all right, we've got a size. We've got a team 1. All right, thank you for humoring me. I think if we go through this together as a team, we can, sometimes prioritization is easier when you think about it in reverse in terms of what maybe, what does the app look like without the other 2, right? So if you look at these one by one, if we have an app that allows you to choose the size of the pizza, but you can't choose the toppings, and you can't order the pizza, you get an app that you can interface with. So you might get some benefit of sort of testing the app out, but no one gets any pizza at the end of it. And as a pizza shop, we don't get to sell any pizza. Similar for number 2, where we get to pick our toppings, we don't get to pick our size, and we don't get to order the pizza. So again, we've got the toppings laid out. We get to test the UI maybe on the app of what that toppings functionality looks like, which carries some value certainly, but at the same time, no one gets to order the pizza. On the third hand, if we just hard code that, there's got to be medium pizzas, it's only medium pineapples and chilies pizza. There are going to be some people like myself that are like, you know what, that's the best pizza in the world. So that's the only thing I can get from this app. I'm going to get a pizza. The pizza store is going to sell a pizza, and we can actually test out more than just the app. We can test out, how does our delivery work? How does the kitchen respond to app orders that come in on the app, and really look at the entire business capability. So that's everything that I have for y'all today. I've got time for another 20 minutes. If anyone would like to ask any questions about any of the slides that we can go to, something specific to your team, Any pushback or challenges, any comments on this? What do we have?
And also, if you have questions that you want to ask, like verbally, if you raise your hand, we can allow you to talk too.
All right. We're going to give it another minute or so in case someone's typing up a question. And then I wish I had more exercises prepared. I didn't realize we'd run through these so quickly. Adrian wants to see the summary page. And I think this is the one you're intending, Adrian. And hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Please feel free to correct me as well. Now that it's up, feel free to type up the question. Robert Cunningham, and Adrian, while you type up your question, I'm going to get to Robert's and come back to you. First burning question, have a couple of examples of great team names you have seen before. Yeah, I think one of the transitions that I was part of the team, we were organized based on our technical domain. So we had a mobile team, a web team, an API or backend team, and a data team. And this was for a sort of project management tool. And when we came around to wanting to restructure the team, we instead of the horizontal slices, if you will, or the domain or technology-based teams that we had, we switched it into a login team, and that team did everything around authorization, authentication, all the way up to the UI for the username and password fields, forgot password, all of that stuff went to that team. Then we had an onboarding team. This is when the user first logs in, and we want to give them a little walk around the tool to increase the adoption. There was another team that was focused on onboarding. So there were some backend components, some data components, certainly some UI components that were different slightly for web and mobile. And so we had an onboarding team. We had an engagement team, and this is where a lot of the core functionality of the project management capabilities come into play, and so forth. So that's an example that I think maybe is generic enough that is easy to explain without a ton of context, and also hopefully that transition from what we had to where we got is helpful there. Thank you for your question, Robert. How would you measure team success? I think there's a few ways to look at this, and starting kind of broadly with why the team exists in the first place is certainly the first consideration, right? So it's a conversation that we sometimes forget when we're on delivery or engineering and technical teams, of sitting with someone from what you might call the product owner or the business. In smaller companies, it may even be the CEO, where you go up and you say, hey, like, this seems to be a pretty big initiative. Can you tell me about like how you arrived at this decision that this is a good investment, and what might you be able to tell at your business level, on the CEO level, or that kind of high level dashboard in the business, if this was worth it, right? And that's usually a way for the product team to start to understand, okay, well, if we were able to wave a magic wand, how would this change the business? Usually it comes down to three factors that are increase in growth. That could be revenue, users, user engagement, like monthly or daily active usage. It could be in reducing cost. So if you have a high touch operation and you want to provide your employees with applications to save their time, the amount of time that folks spend on it, the amount of investment that goes into doing things the manual way, Could be another sort of reason why folks want to do it. And if you don't, and then from there, the product team's able to then look at, okay, well, in order to get the business what they're looking for, this is what we'd be able to see on the product team, and start segueing from there in terms of measuring success. I think the other factor, which maybe was your question, is how do you measure the success of the team itself? How well are we teaming as a team? And ultimately, I think that's a lot harder to measure, at least quantitatively. It tends to be more qualitative or subjective measures. I really like the Roman voting system, where we sit together as a team once a week and we ask all the teammates how we're doing with different aspects of our projects. How well do we think how healthy do we think the backlog is? How comfortable do we feel about the code base? How accountable do we feel? How much authority do we have? And everyone goes from 0 to 5, and we go 1, 2, 3. And there may be someone who's a 2, someone who's a 5, and we can have a discussion around it. And oftentimes the health of the team comes down to the actions that come from those conversations and how easy it is to implement those actions. I realize it's a little bit more hand wavery than something that you'll see on a dashboard with 4 decimal points, but I think it's also early days in thinking about teaming and using something a little bit less efficient to get started, and then maturing into something that's more automatable is the approach that I would take if that's where you're coming about it from. Vaughn has a question. How do you go about encouraging your team members to have fun? So this is a good question. Sharing a little bit personally, I'm someone who gets the most amount of dopamine or fun for myself, engagement from getting stuff done, and I sometimes lose track of the teaming aspect and the journey, and so I have openly admitted in the past that I could use help with bringing more play to our teams, and in trying to look for this, I think one of the key factors I feel like is it comes to psychological safety. It's something that I've had to learn for myself, that when I feel like things are moving as quickly as I'd like, even my facial expressions can put folks on the defensive versus continuing to feel comfortable with making a joke here or there, or having some fun with a way that you try something new. So I think establishing that room for play, the safety associated with it, and the space that we buy with our expectations is for our milestones and deliverables is something that leads to more play and fun on the team. I think the outcomes or the value that have taken a long time to learn is that ultimately those teams are going to come up with a lot more creative ideas if there's a lot more safety. If you're not worried about someone turning around and looking at you like you're an idiot because you proposed something off the wall, you're more likely to propose things off the wall. And even if 1 out of those 10 things are good ideas, or 1 out of those things are great ideas, they're more likely to lead to those great ideas and good ideas. So that's kind of my stream of consciousness, Vaughn, in terms of how I think we can encourage the team to have more fun. The other thing I've realized is that it kind of starts with ourselves, right? With everything that we want to change, start small, start now, start with yourselves. The more fun that you kind of have on the team, the more it invites other folks to kind of join you in having that fun. And that's something else that I would invite you to do, especially if you are a leader on the team. It really gives everyone else permission to do the same. Thank you so much for your questions. Were there any others that I might have missed there, Lindsay?
Nope, you've covered them all.
Cool. Well, I will then give everyone 10 minutes back. Thank you so much for coming in here for your lunch hours. I know some of you are from the West Coast, dialing in bright and early. Thank you very much again for your time. I hope this was helpful. I welcome any feedback from y'all. and look forward to seeing y'all at the next one.